Hello family, I hope anyone who likes my videos to support me by subscribing to my channel. Please give me the energy to make more effort into videos. Thank you for your support family, and let's start our movie recap. In the first scene of our movie, 3 American tourists named Alicia, Daniel, and Chris are climbing a mountain in Georgia. Daniel then asks Chris to marry him and Alicia after they reach the peak. Chris leaves after grabbing his suitcase. The 3 come together later over a campfire. Chris dismisses Daniel's question about what is upsetting him. Daniel makes it obvious that Chris will always be a part of their plans, even if he and Alicia get married. Chris seems more at ease, and the 3 of them celebrate with drinks. Daniel is inebriated, so Alicia leads the way to their tent. As they begin making love, Chris extinguishes their bonfire. Chris awakens the following morning to see a guy looking through their belongings. Then he moves toward the man and challenges him. The guy continues to speak, but Chris keeps knocking him down. When Daniel and Alicia show up, things are resolved. Divi was helping Alicia retrieve her camera so she wouldn't have to climb back up. Alicia says to Chris, identifying the man as Divi. Divi accepts Chris's apology and pardons him. Divi says he'll snap a photo of them and removes the camera from Alicia's purse. The 3 agree and stand for the picture. Divi constantly urges them to change positions for a better view. He suddenly commands them not to move as he closes in on Chris' foot. Chris, according to Divi, is standing on a landmine. Daniel looks down and spots the explosive. Daniel tries to pacify Chris as he begins to panic. Divi claims that Chris cannot budge an inch lest the landmine detonate. Divi promises that he will receive assistance, but it will take him around 4 hours to get to the highway. Alicia is instructed by Daniel to hide behind the rock while he stays with Chris. Daniel promises his closest buddy that assistance will arrive and that they will both attend his wedding. The moment he approaches Alicia, his phone starts to ring. Alicia rejoices because it indicates that they have phone reception. In order to acquire a better signal, the 2 move to a higher location. Daniel calls and asks for assistance. The rescuers didn't want to save cheats, he says as he hangs up the phone and informs Alicia. Daniel clarifies what he says when Alicia expresses confusion. Daniel turns around and leaves after claiming he knows she slept with Chris. Chris admits to Alicia that he had told Daniel everything out of embarrassment. Alicia apologizes to her fiancé while sobbing. Daniel, however, admits that he fabricated the whole event and that his phone never had reception. From behind a tree, he retrieves a shovel and instructs Alicia to prepare a ditch for Chris to leap into. Daniel reveals to Chris that he had arranged the entire event. Daniel detaches the landmine's pin and throws it into the bushes despite Chris' continued apology. Daniel departs and visits Divi, who worked with him to carry out his scheme. Daniel tossed a pin, which Alicia attempts to catch and reinsert into the landmine. She manages to accomplish it, but she's not sure if the bomb went off or not. Chris chooses to take it easy and remain motionless. Alicia decides to start digging and gets the shovel. Ilya, a male, is peering at them from behind a rock in the meantime. Chris and Alicia see him and shout at him for support. Ilya follows a dog that is running in their direction. Chris is kept away from the dog by Alicia, but Ilya is threatening them with a gun. Ilya analyzes Chris after Alicia and Chris raise their hands and describe the scenario, confirming that they are speaking the truth. Ilya asks how he can assist as he removes his suitcase. They must create a trench, according to Alicia, so Chris may jump in it. Ilya reaches out to grip Alicia's arm and inquires about their predicament. Alicia claims that Chris was the reason why her fiancé set them up. Ilya grinned and referred to her as a cheat. Ilya wants to go as Chris yells at him to mind what he says. Chris makes Ilya feel uncomfortable despite the fact that he says he wants to assist. Alicia responds that they do when he asks if they would like his help. Ilya digs through their suitcases and grabs Alicia's underwear after Chris assures him he can have whatever. He begins to sniff it before requesting to have anything he wants in exchange for helping. Ilya approaches Alicia after hearing her answer yes, claiming to be interested in her undergarments. Ilya snatches them and drops them, stating he wants Alicia's undergarment, but Chris stops him and gives him his cash and credit card. Alicia accepts without hesitation and goes to her tent to remove her undergarments. Ilya, however, stops her and demands that she take it off in front of him. Chris steps in and announces that his pals are rescuing them. Ilya, though, challenges Chris and refuses to trust him. He is stopped by Alicia, who yields to Ilya's demands and takes off her shorts before her underwear. Ilya then receives Alicia's underpants and uses them to play fetch with his dog. Ilya answers a call on his radio and immediately begins exploring. Alicia and Chris keep begging him if they may use his radio to call for assistance, and he takes it up and responds. Ilya queries what he would gain by allowing them to use his radio. Despite Alicia's frustration, Ilya keeps asking the same question. Ilya smiles and gives Alicia a hug when Alicia politely asks him if he can call for assistance. underpants. He claims he wants Alicia to accomplish something first before he calls for assistance. He orders her to retrieve the underpants like a dog after throwing them. Alicia declines and decides to dig independently, only to discover how difficult it is. Alicia makes the decision to comply with Ilya's request and retrieves the underpants. Ilya tells her she didn't fetch it like a dog as she hands it to him. Ilya tosses the underwear once again. After that, Alicia crawls to get the underwear so she may give it to Ilya. He claims she made another mistake, claiming that dogs don't utilize their arms. Ilya thus tosses the underwear one final time, and this time, as Alicia crawls to get it, she catches it with her tongue. Ilya accepts it from her in exchange for the radio, which she then receives. When Alicia dials for assistance, the person who answers the phone cannot comprehend English. She asks Ilya to interpret for her, but he refuses and demands that she strip off. Alicia rejects it out of frustration and resumes her digging. The guy on the radio eventually resumes speaking. Ilya takes it and informs Alicia that his buddy Sergey has called to see whether he's okay. If Sergey believes he is in difficulty, he warns that bad things will occur. While Ilya is bugging her, Alicia snatches the radio and informs Sergey that his buddy is okay, but Sergey is unable to understand her. Ilya offers to interpret again and again, but each time he does, Alicia needs to remove a piece of clothing. Ilya grabs the radio and informs Sergey that he is okay after Alicia accepts, and then Alicia removes her jacket. Sergey then queries Ilya as to who is accompanying him. He is to inform Sergey that he encountered visitors and that the radio's battery is running low, per Alicia's instructions. Alicia is forced to remove her top by Ilya, who complies and informs Sergey. She then tells Ilya to go since she will no longer be participating in his game. Ilya departs, but when Sergey asks if he wants soup, he returns. He answers Sergey and runs to Alicia. Ilya instructs her to keep taking off her clothing since they have an agreement. Ilya gets angry and points his pistol at Alicia as a result of her refusal, which makes him angry. Ilya pulls the pistol on Chris after he insults his mother. The moment Ilya is preoccupied, Chris instructs Alicia to flee. Ilya notices this, though, so he orders his dog to pursue after Alicia and quickly follows them. As Alicia screams in the background, Chris constructs a hook, ties it to the chain tied to the pin, and frantically tries to steal Ilya's pistol. He eventually obtains the gun, but Ilya shows up holding Alicia. Chris tries to shoot Ilya, but he hides behind Alicia. Ilya taunts Chris to shoot Ilya while threatening Alicia with a knife. Chris can't pull the trigger, so Ilya commands him to call Alicia a cheater while he slices her cheek, warning him that if he didn't, he would shoot her. Chris complies, yelling inconsolably that Alicia is a cheat. Ilya continues to pant while stating that cheats should be punished. Then, before forcing Alicia to turn around, he leads her behind a boulder and makes fun of her first. Chris stands by helplessly as he begins to treat her badly. Ilya rapes Alicia, but all she can do is scream and sob. Alicia takes his knife and attempts to assault the man as Ilya completes. Alicia hears Chris shout for her to hurry to him. Ilya's dog, however, charges Chris and pushes him into the trench, accidentally activating the pistol. Unfortunately, Chris loses consciousness as the bullet strikes Alicia. Chris is confused when he first awakens. Ilya is heard assuring him that the landmine is a hoax and that a genuine landmine will detonate when it is walked on. Ilya departs, and Chris discovers Alicia laying next to him with a deadly neck wound. He begs for assistance fervently, but no one responds. Chris eventually makes it to a local's home. He asks a mother and her daughter who have just emerged whether they have a map. He informs them that he is lost and that they should provide him a map. Chris is delighted when the girl claims that she can print a map from her computer. The child and her mother, who identify themselves as Lika and Tanya, welcome Chris as he makes his way around the home and ascends the stairs. Ilya is taking care of his bees on the opposite side of the land at the same time. They provide Chris the map and welcome him into their house. Chris expresses gratitude and inquires as to whether there is a restaurant in the area. He is welcome to join them for lunch as they have extra food. According to Lika, Chris accepts their offer since Tanya concurs. He is then taken into the dining room and takes a seat at the table. Ilya returns from his errands, ties his dog up with a chain, and then enters his house and enters the dining room. He discovers Chris with his wife and daughter, much to his disgust. Chris is introduced by Tanya, and he introduces Ilya. Tanya is astonished and queries whether they are acquainted. Ilya's name is on the wall. Chris informs her, and he declines. Ilya then urges him to go, but Chris refuses. Ilya insists and offers to take him wherever. Chris greets him with a grin but requests that he wait until he has finished his meal before leaving. Tanya steps in and offers her condolences for her husband's actions. Chris is allowed to eat, but Ilya warns that once he is done, they must go. Chris accepts and takes a seat, but he begs Ilya to join them and he declines. Chris continues to eat till he finishes his lunch. He then asks Tanya if he may have more, but Ilya steps in and tells him to go. Tanya tells Chris she believes it's better if he leaves right now. Chris accepts their offer and takes Ilya with him as he thanks them for the supper. Ilya instructs Chris to meet him someplace in 15 minutes as they travel. Chris ignores his warning not to include his family in their argument and simply grins before leaving. Ilya observes Chris getting into his car and driving off toward the freeway. Ilya rushes to free his dog's bonds as Chris flees from his sight. Ilya attempts to eat as the family is seated at the dining room table. He then exits and makes his way to the living room. Ilya continues to pace before deciding against calling the police. He hears his dog barking from where he is seated, apparently at something. Ilya is alarmed when the dog's barking abruptly ceases, so he walks to the porch and starts yelling for his dog. He descends the steps and looks for the dog if it doesn't arrive. Chris returns in the meanwhile and bangs on their door while claiming there is an emergency. As she opens the door, Lika peers out the window. Their bloody dog is carried inside by Chris, who informs the family that a vehicle ran over it on the highway. Ilya notices a blood trail on the ground at the same moment. He scrambles back to his residence in a fit of fear. Ilya notices Chris and his dog as he enters. He grabs his firearm out of rage only to discover that his rounds are missing. Ilya raises his gun at Chris as he approaches and threatens to shoot him. Chris, though, refuses to move and challenges him to fire. Chris also grinned and informed Ilya that he was aware his rifle was unloaded. He then takes out a pistol and shoots Ilya in the kneecaps twice. Tanya saw her spouse on the ground after hearing the ruckus. She promises Chris that they will do whatever as long as he puts the pistol away, and Chris complies by doing the same. Tanya is instructed to bring Ilya inside, and Lika is told to assist her mother. Chris instructs Tanya to take a position in the corner as they place Ilya on a sofa. Tanya's wrists and feet are to be tied by Lika at his direction. Tanya gives him money, but Chris declines, saying he has no need for it. Chris fires at their mirror to intimidate Lika since she is hesitant to bind her mother. Lika cries heartbreakingly as she ties her mother up. Ilya is shown some underpants, and Chris inquires as to its owner. Lika asserts that it is hers, but Ilya keeps pleading with Chris to pardon him, stating that he only hurt Alicia because he was inebriated. Chris then grinned and seized a bottle of booze. He starts to drink, and by threatening Tanya and Lika, he forces them to join him. Ilya screams in anguish as Chris moves near him and pours the alcohol over his injuries. Chris takes Lika and begins removing her underpants after becoming dissatisfied. He throws it after that and commands Lika to retrieve it for him like a dog. Lika has no option but to reach it and give it to Chris. She is informed by him that dogs lack hands. Chris forces Lika to take the underwear in her mouth by throwing it again. As soon as she hands it to him, Chris runs up to Ilya and forces him to eat it. Lika is seized by Chris, who is aiming a pistol at her head. He describes dragging Alicia till she passed away while looking for assistance. Chris slams Lika to the ground while telling Tanya that he discovered Ilya's money in the mountains. Then, in front of Ilya, Chris snatches Lika once more and begins stroking her chest with his rifle. Chris then tells them that they will play a game after that. Lika is taken by Chris, who announces that they will play roulette. He takes out all but one bullet from his handgun. Lika will remove a piece of clothing if she is fortunate enough to find an empty chamber. Chris promises to spin the cylinder. He also warns her that if she makes it out alive with nothing else to take off, she has won. Lika is positioned in the center after Chris changes the table and chairs. He rotates the cylinder and fires into a chamber that is empty, forcing Lika to remove some of her clothing. Chris refuses to let Ilya's daughter out of his sight so that he may direct his rage towards him. Ilya then stoops to the ground to try to save his daughter, but Chris only chuckles. Chris is furious and keeps turning the cylinder while yelling at Lika to take her clothing off. Chris shouts at Ilya, telling him that Lika has a higher chance than Alicia had of obtaining a chamber with a bullet. Ilya begs Chris to stop repeatedly, but he refuses. Chris spins the cylinder once again while Lika begins removing her clothing. Unfortunately, the cylinder jams in a chamber that is already loaded, and he then fatally shoots Lika in the head. Chris notices what he did, and his eyes widen. Tanya and Ilya watch helplessly as their daughter passes away. Chris then walks to a corner and sits alone, his expression betraying a deep sense of remorse. This is how our movie ends. Leave us a comment on how you found this movie recap. See you in the following movie recap.